We should use 30% of our energy to describe the problems and then 70% to think about the solutions. The core of the problems of our society, in terms of a population which for certain reasons is very sensitive to propaganda. Its psychological system develops, and if you understand this developmental process, you also start to really understand what the act of truth-telling is.
Great to be with you. And again, Mattias, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Yes, well, I'm a professor in clinical psychology. I think it's always difficult to say who you are. Michel Houellebecq, which is the best writer of the moment, I think, said, "It seems to me that the human being is a mystery to itself," and I believe that. We don't know who we are. But anyway, I'm a professor in clinical psychology then. I articulated this theory on mass formation and totalitarianism during the corona crisis. And I explained that what we were facing during the corona crisis was the emergence of a new totalitarian system, not a fascist or a communist totalitarian system, but a technocratic, transhumanist totalitarian system. And just like every totalitarian system, it was based on the phenomenon of mass formation, which we had this podcast about 2 years ago, I think. Yeah, and then I was invited to talk about the way in which this transhumanist, technocratic ideology threatens humanity itself, threatens the human being itself. And that's, of course, a characteristic of all totalitarianism. It destroys the core of the human being. And that's why, according to Hannah Arendt, it's the ultimate evil, because it always destroys the very core, the psychological essence of the human being. Moving beyond the description of the problem, and that's important, I think. We have been throughout the last 3 years, many people have been describing the problems we are dealing with, or that are surfacing now. The problems of our society, and I was one of them. In my latest book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, I described the problems of the Enlightenment society. I described the problems of human living together in the 21st century. But we should move beyond that, and we should think about the solutions, I think. And I think that's what we should use 30% of our energy to describe the problems and then 70% to think about the solutions. That's what we should do, and that's what I want to contribute to, and that's what I will try to contribute to in my next book.
There's an element of looking in the rearview mirror at what's happened, still reclassifying, and I think there's been a almost formalization of the evidence now. We're becoming more sophisticated in understanding the problem, but also how we articulate the problem. But then similarly, we're looking forward and looking, where do we go from here?
Yep.
Looking at solutions, but also using our creative faculties to imagine a different path. Now, you've mentioned your new book. You've examined the root causes of what we've witnessed, certainly from a social and psychological perspective and various other perspectives, looking at totalitarianism. You've drawn on mass formation, and now you're looking ahead yourself and thinking towards solutions. Tell us a bit about what you see as some of the most vital solutions to these problems you've focused on for the last few years.
Yes, from the analysis of the problem follows logically the solution, I think. And I've analyzed the core of the problems of our society in terms of a population which for certain reasons is very sensitive to propaganda. And since the 19th century on, we see how a new elite emerged, in particular since the French Revolution, I think, a new elite which uses excessively propaganda to manipulate the population. The old elite imposed their will to the population in an overt, direct way. But the new elite couldn't do that anymore for certain reasons, which I will not go into now. But the new elite realized that as they were incapable of imposing their will in a direct, overt way, they had to impose it in an indirect, covert way. And that's what they developed propaganda for. So in the 19th century, we've seen the emergence of a completely new kind of lie in our society, which was called propaganda, a kind of lie which is an ideological, theoretical lie, and also an institutionalized lie. There were institutions established that cultivated the art of lying, and we call them propaganda institutes. And now, from the 19th century onwards, propaganda became more and more and more important to the elite. It became more and more important to the elite, and now we live in a public space which is constantly saturated with indoctrination propaganda. And as soon as you start to realize that that is the core problem of our society, that we have an elite that uses propaganda excessively to control the population, and that we have a population which, because of its lonely state, is extremely sensitive to propaganda, you see that the real problem and the real crisis we are facing is not a climate crisis, it's not a Me Too crisis, it's not a banking crisis, it's not a terrorism crisis. No, the real crisis is a crisis of truth. And the solution to the problem is truth-telling. We cannot fight propaganda with propaganda. We can cure a society which is sick of propaganda only by the act of truth-telling. So that's what we have to rediscover and reinvent at the moment. We have to rediscover what it means for a human being to tell the truth and what the act of truth-telling from the psychological perspective really is. And that's what we have to cultivate. That's the art we have to practice, the art of truth speech. And we shouldn't think naive about truth. Truth is not a simple thing. We cannot give a simple definition of truth. We have to feel what it means to speak the truth. Truth is something, literally, that we feel inside of us and that we articulate through words. And if these words reach someone else, the phenomenon of resonance manifests, which connects people to each other, which makes people transcend their individualistic existence and connects them. And that's why this truth-telling is the real solution to the problem of the Enlightenment tradition, to the root cause of the problem, which is this loneliness. So truth-telling is, at least at the psychological level, I think, the real solution
and
to the problems we are facing.
I agree with you that it's incredibly challenging to define that truth. And if we take the kind of post-Enlightenment, materialistic, reductionistic kind of rationalism, everything that is observable, it's helped us to understand portions of the world, but it's left somewhat of a gap. But within that gap, is there also a risk that, say, through post-modernity, we've seen this rise of subjectivity? Is it possible that truth could be diluted by that form of personalized truth? What is true for me rather than what is universally true? Is that a risk when we talk about truth-telling?
It is. I think truth has a certain paradoxical characteristic, which is that it is at the same time singular, strictly individual, and universal. That's the strange thing. You know, you speak the truth when you have the courage to show something that is something strictly of yourself, something that you usually hide behind an ideal image, behind your ego. When you articulate this very singular experience that you feel inside yourself, you speak the truth, so it's strictly singular. And the strange thing is that at the same time, when you do so, when you articulate this singularity, other people will recognize it and will resonate with it, meaning that it touches a universal string. That's the strange thing. That's the strange thing about the truth. It's at the same time strictly singular and universal. It's a paradox, but Niels Bohr, the famous physicist, said, every true theory ends in a paradox, and it's the same with a theory about truth. Truth is at the same time singular and universal. It's very characteristic.
I can imagine hearing that some would say, well, how do we quantify that? And I think that comes from the Enlightenment theory of trying to objectively measure Do you have an answer to that? And is there a arbiter of truth? How do we discern beyond that instinctual, intuitive?
There is no arbiter of truth. There is no truth criterion. We cannot measure it. It's impossible. Truth is not a phenomenon that can be measured or quantified, I think. It's a pure experience. For a certain reason, sometimes we have the experience that someone tells the truth. And that experience has a lot to do with resonance. Sometimes we feel that we resonate with something someone else says. And that's the fact, I think, that happens under certain very specific conditions. If someone's speech starts from something he really experiences inside himself, and if he has the courage to penetrate with his words, this veil of appearance, if he can talk without caring about the consequences in the world of appearances, then, and there is someone else who opens up and who can receive these words, that's the moment when you have the feeling, the experience that someone is speaking the truth. But we can never quantify that, I think. It's something that we have to experience. That's the only way. It's a phenomenological, it's a phenomenon that we have to experience to know that it exists.
What's interesting, when I asked you at the beginning, who are you? And even that question, and I really enjoyed your response. Now, does that also pose part of the challenge? Because we do, as humans, tend to identify, in the business world, people recognize job titles, and that's how they create identity and meaning. But when we ask that deeper question, and if we are finding that wanting, is there therefore a void of truth? And how do we go from that explorative question to actually going deeper into finding that truth? Are there barriers that are perhaps internal barriers as well as external barriers that prevent us from accessing the kind of truth that you're talking about?
Yes, I think indeed, if someone asks you who you are, you can answer that question in a, how would I call that? In an imaginary way. Answer right, just you can tell them your name, you can show them some certain photographs of yourself. You can refer to your career or your social status, doesn't matter what, but that's all the world of appearances. Who someone really is, we can only learn by resonating with what he says. Again, it's this phenomenon of resonance. You need someone who wants to show something of himself that usually remains hidden behind the outer appearance of someone, to really connect to someone and to really feel who someone is. But the strange thing is that in the end, indeed, we don't know ourselves. We need someone else to know ourselves. It's at the moment that we feel that someone else resonates with what we are saying, that we also can see and feel ourselves outside of ourselves. So we need the other to know ourselves.
So how does that deeper, almost existential questioning connect with the types of questions that are being asked at a conference like this, which is, in its original form, was really focusing on the scientific components of what had occurred over the last few years and continues to focus on some of the scientific elements? How does that type of deeper questioning connect with that scientific, observable process to try and quantify the reality? Is there a disconnect? Are they mutually exclusive, or are they? How do you see those two types of exploration when we seek the truth?
I think they do connect with each other in several respects. The first thing we noticed during the pandemic is that science itself got lost in the world of appearances. I mean, so many people noticed that what presented itself as science was not science at all, that it was something imaginary, something that was absurd in many respects. And this problem was much older than the corona crisis. And long before the corona crisis, back in 2005, it was already observed that up to 85% of the academic papers are just false. John Ioannidis published a wonderful paper about that. So everybody who wanted to see it could start to see that what we thought was truthful and what we thought was rational knowledge was not rational knowledge at all. So the problem we were stumbling upon in our society was that we, in a certain way, nobody knew anymore what the truth was. And that's what that's what we have to try to find a solution for. That's what the conference was all about, I think, or at least a certain aspect of the conference was exactly the fact that most research, most academic research, most scientific publications about the crisis were not true and were not reliable. And that's what we can try to find a solution by measuring better, by observing in a more objective way what happens. Yes, but that's only a very superficial solution, I think. I think that the real solution is rather situated in the fact that what we have to try to realize as a society is that rational understanding in general can never grasp the essence of life, and that our rational understanding is extremely limited, and that it's only this kind of knowledge that transcends rationality, which is much more an empathic knowledge that can be the true guiding principle for a human existence and for human living together. So I think in this way, the two things are connected. Truth-telling is exactly this kind of, the realization of this empathic resonance with each other. Truth-telling is what connects human beings in an empathic way. And that's the real solution for the limitations of rational knowledge and scientific knowledge in general that we are stumbling upon now in the corona crisis and much broader in the academic world in general.
Thank you. This has been a deeply insightful conversation once again, and I think everyone here this weekend, this event, the Better Way Conference, is on that path of truth-seeking and then truth-telling, because they're two different things, I think, is finding the truth, whether at the level that we've discussed, that kind of visceral internal sense, but also that external exploration of reality. And then how do we communicate that truth in the art of truth-telling? Could you close by telling us a little bit about what you're going to be focusing on your new book, which is looking at that part of the solution?
Yes, on exactly this. What are the psychological characteristics of the act of truth-telling, in contrast with propaganda, indoctrination, all kinds of rhetorics? That's what the new book will be about. And to really understand what truth is, I think we have to understand how our psychological system, how our soul, if you want, emerges and develops within a linguistic relationship with the other. A child is born in a linguistic relationship with other people. That's where its psychological system develops. And if you understand this developmental process, you also start to really understand what the act of truth-telling is. It has everything to do. The act of truth-telling has everything to do with being capable of leaving your ego and your narcissism behind and speak in a sincere way, starting from something that we usually hide behind our outer appearance, behind all the ideal images that society projects onto us, behind the matrix of social rules we are supposed to follow and conform to. So that's what we need to do. Every time we speak, we can choose. We can speak in such a way that we confirm all these ideal images that society projects onto us, all these social rules, or this matrix of social rules that society expects us to follow, or we can speak in such a way that we stay loyal to what we feel is sincere and honest inside of ourselves and talk no matter what the consequences are in the world of appearances. I will elaborate on this in a psychological way, in a very technical way sometimes, but I think it is extremely important to understand as well as possible what truth-telling is and under what conditions we can practice it. Because I really believe that it is this act which is as old as mankind itself that will be the solution for the problem we are dealing with now, the problem of a society which is sick of propaganda and of this new type of lie, which we call propaganda, which the elite uses in such an excessive way.
Thank you, Mattias.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Dan.
Saying no to the WHO. You're invited to join us on the Road to Geneva, our exciting new campaign to resist the World Health Organization. The Road to Geneva campaign will culminate in a pan-European convoy that's going to converge outside the city of Geneva on Friday, the 31st of May, ahead of a peaceful rally outside the United Nations building on Saturday, the 1st of June. If you want to join us, head over to roadtogeneva.com and you'll find about the latest convoy plans, how to get involved, and details of the wider campaign to challenge the WHO. I hope we'll see you on the road to Geneva.